Take off that coat. Nobody here cares about fake medals. That's what the white officer shouted, before he tore the left lapel off an elderly black man's jacket, ripping a Purple Heart clean off his chest. No one stopped him. No one said a word. Just the sound of metal hitting marble, and the silence of a justice system that no longer recognized the people who once died for it. But the man they humiliated that day wasn't some fraud. He was Jeremiah D. Knox, a former Navy SEAL, who took 4 pieces of shrapnel in Kandahar to save his team. He had been honored by 3 U.S. presidents, and now he returned, not to speak, but to force the system to face the evidence it had buried years ago. If honor can be torn off someone's chest in a courtroom, what's left in this country that still deserves respect? What state are you in? And if that happened in your town, would you stay silent or finally start paying attention? Because today's story isn't about a medal. It's about how an entire nation lost its moral compass. Friday afternoon in Wexley Borough, the sun was gentle, and the breeze just strong enough to make maple leaves drift slowly onto the worn sidewalk in front of Holloway's Cuts and Trims. A dark wooden chair sat slightly tilted beside the entrance, about 3 inches off to the left compared to last year. No one dared move it, because the man who sat in that chair was Mr. Walter Freeman, a 76-year-old black veteran who had never bowed to anyone, not even war. Walter sat there like he did every weekend afternoon. His white dress shirt was crisp, and on his left wrist, he still wore a plastic hospital band printed with "Patient, Wexley General." He'd just been discharged that morning. On his head was an old baseball cap, the front faded, "Combat Medic, Vietnam, 1971. His right hand held a plastic bag of blood pressure pills. His left rested atop a carved wooden cane, etched with the words Ellis 1971, the name of his brother who died at Key Sand. He said nothing. He never did. Those passing by all knew. Walter's gaze wasn't for conversation. It was for remembrance. A reminder of the promises America once swore never to forget. And perhaps that was exactly what made Matthew Taylor uncomfortable. Taylor, 28, was a new officer with the Wexley Police Department. High and tight haircut, cheap sunglasses, and a smirk that always seemed just a bit mocking. He didn't know what worse smelled like. He didn't care to. He stepped out of the patrol car, still holding an open soda can, walking with the swagger of someone who'd never been denied anything. Taylor's eyes scanned the street like everything needed to be controlled. And when they landed on Walter, still unbowed, unflagged, he stopped. "That your chair, old man?" he called out, voice laced with contempt. "Or you think this sidewalk's a memorial for some crusty war ghosts?" Walter didn't respond. His eyes followed a falling leaf, as if the commotion was worth less than the shadow it cast on the pavement. "Not going to answer?" Taylor sneered. "All right then, let me redecorate your monument a bit." He pulled out a red spray can. To the shock of a few passers-by, Taylor lifted it to Walter's face and sprayed a thick line across his hat and forehead. The hiss of the spray echoed, an unmistakable sound to anyone who'd ever defaced an old wall. Walter didn't resist. He simply bowed his head slightly. The cane slipped from his fingers and hit the pavement with a sharp crack. The shaft split in two, the words Ellis 1971 facing the ground like an unmarked gravestone. Taylor stepped back, arms crossed like he'd finished a masterpiece. "You ever save anybody?" he growled. "Well, now it's my turn to save society from ghosts like you." A young woman burst out of the barber shop, shouting, "He just got out of the hospital this morning. He's still wearing the damn wristband. You maniac." A teenage boy raised his phone to live stream. Taylor lunged, but it was too late. 6 others had already started recording. Walter's eyes, now streaked with red paint, didn't close. And in that unblinking gaze, the whole street suddenly realized they weren't just witnessing an act of disrespect. They were watching a nation bow its head to its own memory and choose silence. Only the sound of falling leaves and a broken cane under the fading light. Walter stayed in that chair, head stained red, his white shirt blotched like someone had scribbled over a folded flag. His hands didn't shake. His eyes didn't blink. But it was that gaze, quiet, steady, not angry, not yielding, that made everyone around him feel ashamed. The teenager who posted the clip was Jalen Reddick, 17, son of a veteran who had served with Walter in Da Nang. He uploaded the footage without edits. No clickbait title. Just, he didn't say anything. But the whole country should listen. The video was exactly 30 seconds long. And the moment that stole everyone's breath happened at second 25, when Matthew Taylor turned to the crowd, mocking, "I'm rewriting the history of these old men." The camera shook, then stilled. The lens captured Walter's face, red paint dripping from forehead to chin, but his eyes, unchanged, staring deep, not at Taylor, but straight through him. They called the video the 25th second. Some said it was the stare that made America choke. One comment read, "I've seen a lot of police overreach videos, but I've never seen anyone endure it with such terrifying silence." Overnight, the video hit 1.2 million views. Hashtag 25th second climbed into the national top 3. Local outlets like Wexley Post and Georgia Tribune ran the story, but the most unexpected response came from the veteran community. On a forum called Brothers in Dust, one member wrote, "I don't know who he is, but I've seen that look on battlefields when someone knows that speaking up means your brothers die." No one edited the video. No music. No voiceover. It didn't need it. An old man, spray-painted in broad daylight. No resistance. No curses. Just a pair of eyes that made the whole country feel too small for something too big. People kept replaying second 25, zooming in, enhancing light, adjusting contrast. But what they were looking for wasn't a tale. It was truth. A truth that didn't need to be shouted, only seen. Naira Elston, a medical student who once interned at Wexley General, was the first to repost it to her blog with the caption, "I don't know his name, but those eyes, no one deserves to be treated like that. No one." The post only had 227 views at first, but within 4 hours, it was reposted across 6 independent news platforms, from Veteran Voices to Civic Lens. Not because of shares, but because of an emotion that words couldn't hold. People weren't angry. They were stunned. Because Walter's silence wasn't surrender. It was an indictment that needed no language. And from that moment, the entire country began to look inward, not asking what happened, but instead, how do we let this happen? And no one stopped it. Just 3 hours after the 25th second video hit 1 million views, major platforms like Streamline, FaceSnap, and VibeTube took it down simultaneously. The reason? Sensitive content and violation of community guidelines. But the community didn't agree. Jalen Reddick, the teen who posted the video, just slumped over the counter at Wexley Beans, the coffee shop where he worked after school. They wiped it clean, he mumbled to Desiree Holloway, who had just finished her afternoon shift at the barber shop. But Desiree just smirked, handed him a USB drive, and whispered, "I saved the original before they pulled it. Upload it to the forums." And from there, the clip came back to life, like a tidal wave funneled through the underground web. Within 6 hours, the video had spread everywhere, from Reddit to a private Discord server called Vanguard Dust, where veterans talked about old battlefields. A member going by the handle SparrowMedic71 reposted the video with the caption, "I've seen that look before. The last time was in a blood-soaked bunker in Pleiku. Look closely before you dare speak of honor." The media storm didn't come from headlines. It came from shared memory. At FIU headquarters, the Federal Integrity Unit, a media analyst named Gavin Nels was sipping coffee when the automated monitoring system lit up. A surge of 27 clips, all tied to the same tag. Hashtag 25th second was being uploaded at a rate labeled above social alert threshold. Gavin squinted and muttered, "Another leak, but this one's different." Just 2.7 miles away at a bar, a former Marine named Zaire Coleman was downing his third beer when his phone buzzed. He tapped a link from a friend and then froze, eyes unblinking, beer dripping from the rim of his glass. "God," he whispered. "That's him. That's the medic who pulled me from the burning Humvee in Fallujah." Zaire didn't call anyone, didn't share the video yet. He just got up, walked to his car, opened the trunk, and pulled out a wooden box he hadn't touched in over a decade. Inside was an old, faded photo of a black man with a white armband, bandaging the leg of a young soldier with a tired smile. In the corner, scribbled handwriting read, "Walter, medic," never withdrew. The story reached even those who never touched social media. A widowed woman in Wexley Heights, once an Army nurse, printed a freeze frame from the video and taped it to her wall with a handwritten note beneath. "He is our memory. Don't let him be erased." And just like that, Walter Freeman, the man who never uttered a single word in the clip, made a whole country speak. Not in outrage, but in quiet reverence. They didn't know who he was, but they knew he had been part of something larger than law, larger than any badge. No one asked, "Where is he from?" They only asked, "How do we forget him for so long?" While social media remained flooded with endless reposts of Walter Freeman sitting motionless in the golden light, head streaked with red paint, cane broken in half, an unexpected detail emerged. Not from the press, not from the government, but from a short post buried in the archive section of a military blog called Iron Ledger. The author was a former battlefield analyst, verified account, signed Theo M. The post was only a paragraph. I remember seeing him at Sierra Base back in 2003, not as a medic, but as the man reviewing strategic files for an interagency humanitarian unit. If I'm not mistaken, he was seated next to Lieutenant General Granger during the repatriation policy meeting. I can't confirm the name, but those eyes, I'll never forget them. Below the post, users quickly pieced it together. Sierra Base had been the logistics hub for a joint operation between the Department of Defense and the Veterans Affairs Agency, where the VPA-3 protocol was born, the policy mandating dignity protection for post-service veterans. And if Walter Freeman had been there, then he wasn't just the old man outside the barber shop. One day later, Veterans Chronicle published an independent investigative article. Leaked documents contained an old photo. In one, a black man in a light gray civilian suit stood between two U.S. generals, holding a briefing marked Draft Clause 9B, no retroactive downgrades of honor. Zoom in on a man's face, deep eyes, a slightly crooked nose, a scar on the left cheek. No doubt, it was Walter. At the same time, another image went viral on X, formerly Twitter. A man in a weathered uniform, wearing a boonie hat, carrying a wounded soldier through gunfire. Scribbled beneath in pencil, W. Freeman, Key, San, 1971. The real explosion didn't come from Walter. It came from Thomas Freeman, his son, who had remained silent for 3 days after the incident. When the 25-second video reached senior advisors in Washington, one of them recognized a familiar face. Not the elderly man sprayed with red paint, but the younger man standing behind him in the corner of the frame, holding up a phone. Not live streaming, just recording. An intelligence officer identified him as Thomas Freeman, a former Homeland Security advisor under the previous administration, now living off-grid in Glenfield Heights. The next morning, an 8-second clip went viral across platforms. Thomas stepped out of a red brick house, said nothing, and handed a reporter an old silver laminated ID card, the encrypted badge of the OAS, Office of Advanced Security. The text was faded but legible. Walter, TV, clearance level 7 directive class, Obsidian. Viewers across the country fell silent. The elderly man, humiliated in public, had once authored policies on veteran dignity. And the person filming him? His son, once in charge of assessing the nation's highest-level security threats. Then a new twist emerged. A secret link was posted from an anonymous account named CodeVanna23. The file contained an unreleased transcript from a closed-door joint congressional hearing. And it was a 2009 quote from Walter. "If the day comes when people forget who stitched their wounds, let them face that truth on camera. Dry blood fades, but silence, once seen, becomes eternal evidence." The man who was sprayed with paint was no longer a victim. He had become a symbol. The country began to understand. Walter Freeman wasn't silent out of weakness. He was silent because he had once been heard where no one else dared speak. And now, he was showing the truth without ever saying a word. That evening, as news channels still recycled headlines like "Combat Medic Humiliated," "Nation Rises," and "Veteran Son Reveals Classified Identity," A black SUV with no plates quietly pulled up in front of the Wexley Police Department. It wasn't an official vehicle. No sirens. But the moment its door opened, the station's energy shifted. Thomas Freeman stepped out, not in a polished suit, not wearing sunglasses, not flanked by agents. Just a 47-year-old man in a charcoal gray coat, posture straight, left hand in his pocket, right hand holding a sealed envelope. He didn't glance around, didn't check the street, didn't quicken his pace. He walked like every step had already been measured, and everyone else was just watching the playback. At the front desk, the young on-duty officer looked up to greet him, but Thomas simply placed the envelope down. No introduction, no request. But when his hand hovered over the biometric scanner beside the desk, the real shock came. Not from Thomas, but from the machine. It didn't beep. It didn't reject him. It opened. Right then, a red message appeared on the internal systems. Access granted, Tier Obsidian, override all protocols. In the monitoring room, a lieutenant choked on his words. Obsidian? Obsidian clearance? He turned to a colleague, voice nearly a whisper. I thought that was reserved for wartime federal ops. Before anyone could react, Thomas was already walking down the main hallway. With every step, the temperature seemed to drop, not from cold, but from the fear of being seen by someone who knew everything and didn't need to say it out loud. Inside Central Surveillance, Chief Ronald Beckett, 52, was reviewing Officer Taylor's incident report when a call from the front desk came through. A shaky voice relayed, Sir, there's a man here. No name, but he bypassed every security protocol. You should come down. Beckett straightened his tie and walked out, still carrying the air of command, until he came face to face with Thomas in the corridor. The two men stood less than 6 feet apart, but the silence between them was filled with unspoken truths. Thomas didn't speak for the first 10 seconds. Then he looked directly at Beckett, not with anger, not with contempt, just the gaze of someone who'd written the memos Beckett had signed, but never read. The man who sprayed the paint, still armed. His voice was low, each word distinct, not forceful, because they carried their own weight. Beckett swallowed, lips trembling. No, sir. Weapons been secured. Thomas nodded. Once. No thanks. No relief. Good. Because we don't let children play with gasoline after they've lit the match. A nearby officer dropped his pen. No one laughed. No one moved. As Thomas turned to leave, the air seemed to pull back with him. The automatic door opened like it already knew which way he'd go. One young officer whispered, Who is that? The one beside him shook his head. Not who. It's what he used to be. Chief Beckett stood frozen, sweat breaking on his forehead. He issued no orders. He just kept repeating in his mind. Obsidian. Damn it, we just got visited by someone who doesn't exist in any system. No one needed to shout anymore, because now, silence had become the highest rank in the command room. Just moments after Thomas Vincent Ellis walked out of the Wexley Police Department, the automatic door ceiling shut behind him like a period that required no sentence. Not a single soul inside spoke for nearly 2 minutes. No alarms, no orders, only an invisible but irreversible shift in the air. In the surveillance room, a console lit up. The screen flashed a pulsing red message. Access termination in progress. User, tailored M28. Seconds later, 3 internal systems simultaneously revoked Officer Matthew Taylor's access. The armory door rejected his fingerprint. His internal email account was remotely logged out. His personnel file switched to a temporarily frozen status. In the break area, Matthew had just stepped out of the holding room, still holding a hot cup of coffee, when he saw 2 internal affairs officers standing by the door. Taylor, said the older one. His voice wasn't loud or angry, but it carried weight. You are required to surrender your badge and service weapon. Immediately, Matthew chuckled, thinking it was a joke. You serious? Based on what? One officer held out a handheld device. It displayed his profile marked as under review. Severe ethical breach. Severe? All I did was deal with some stubborn old man blocking the... Before he could finish, the younger officer subtly tilted his head. A silent gesture. Stop. Not because they wouldn't let him speak, but because no one cared to listen. Down the hallway, Several young officers paused as Matthew was escorted past. No one saluted. No one nodded. One female officer whispered to her colleague, "I heard that old guy saved 7 people during an airstrike." The other replied, "And this guy sprayed paint on his head like it was a blank wall." At Internal Affairs, Matthew was instructed to place his badge, WPD 4428, into a metal tray. The sound of the metal striking the bottom echoed, dry and final. It didn't sound like a badge. It sounded like the illusion of power shattering. Next was his Glock, still in its leather holster. He laid it down more slowly, like dragging it out might change something. But nothing changed. The IA officer typed a few commands and said plainly, "You're being reassigned to temporary monitoring. No contact with the press. You're not to leave the Wexley city limits. All access credentials have been disabled." "So what? I'm a criminal now." Matthew barked, his voice rising. A soft laugh rang from an adjoining office, someone who'd clearly heard enough. No one responded to him. Chief Ronald Beckett watched everything from behind the two-way mirror. He didn't step out, but as Matthew turned to look for someone, anyone, to back him up, their eyes met. And in that look, Matthew saw something more brutal than punishment. He was alone, completely. Out in the front lobby, a young officer asked, "What regulation are we using to process him?" The one beside him answered without hesitation, "Not a regulation, a principle." And in the back office, beneath a sign that still read, "Wexley serves with honor," a staff member quietly removed the slogan underneath, "Excellence through order." In its place, he wrote with a dry erase marker, "Honor doesn't come from a badge. It comes from how we confront what's wrong." From that moment on, Wexley was no longer the station of silent enforcers. It had undergone a moral purge, not by command, but by the presence of someone who didn't need to threaten anyone to make them afraid. The next morning, while Wexley Borough still lay under a haze of dawn mist, an old fax machine inside the Federal Integrity Unit's field office whirred to life, though no one had touched it. A single sheet slid out, trembling under the pale neon light, its message printed clearly. Directive Obsidian. Priority Level 7. Begin restoration of federal honor to Walter Freeman. No header. No sender name. Only one code string at the bottom. Hashtag Vanna Presence. Override code. Omega string 378A. Gavin Nels, the 35-year-old duty officer, jolted upright as if shocked. He'd never seen an override string of that tier, let alone a fax self-triggered from a locked system. He opened his terminal and keyed the code into the secure gateway. Within 15 seconds, the system began shifting into internal review mode. The screen lit up with a warning. Legacy protocol activated. Cross-reference begins. Classified files began appearing. Black and white photos from the 1971 Key Sand campaign. Declassified memos stamped unsorted. Among them was a document never cited publicly before, a draft nomination for the Silver Star Medal for Medic Walter Freeman, suspended in 1973 without explanation. No explanation, but one handwritten note in red ink stood out in the corner. Political risk. Recommend archival freeze. Gavin exhaled sharply. "Holy hell," he muttered, then grabbed his phone. "We've got a situation, and this one's not in the manual." The climax began here. At 10:04 a.m., while the system continued scanning cross-reference data, a new window opened. A grainy black and white video clip played. The audio, though, was crystal clear. A wounded soldier, his shirt soaked in blood, being carried across enemy lines. A voice off-screen rang out, clear and chilling. "This is Lieutenant Ethan Mallory. Whoever sees this footage, if Walter Freeman isn't honored, then we all owe him our lives. He pulled me out of hell when no one else had the guts to go back in." What shook Gavin wasn't the content of the video. It was the timestamp. July 12th, 2003, Fallujah, Iraq. He was there. No one ever mentioned it. No record listed it. But the footage didn't lie. In the grainy frame, that face, those eyes, the same ones that silenced a nation during the 25th second, were visible, wrapping bandages amid the sounds of gunfire. This was no longer just about a veteran being humiliated. It was about a piece of history deliberately buried. That same afternoon, Thomas Freeman didn't call a press conference. He sent a single encrypted file to the Department of Defense, the VA, and a handful of trusted independent media outlets. The attachment was titled, Recognition Petition, Freeman 71A. Inside were 42 documents, old deployment orders, off-the-record medical rescue reports, battlefield photos, an unfinished draft of the Veteran Integrity Clause, and 3 signed statements from veterans saved by Walter across 2 different wars. At the bottom, a single line, unformatted and unsigned. A government can send men to war, but if it can't remember their names, then that government has failed. At the Department of Defense's Atlanta office, a senior advisor stared at the closing line and exhaled. We're not just restoring the honor of a soldier. We're unearthing the national memory we tried to forget. The system began to stir, not for politics, not for headlines, but because a man had asked for nothing in return. He left behind only one thing, a reason for the system to finally look in the mirror. 2 days after the Restore Federal Honor to Walter Freeman fax made its way through high-level security channels, a short post appeared on a veterans forum in Georgia, a state known for its open access to war records. The poster was no stranger. Zaire Coleman, the one-armed veteran who had spoken out at the bar after watching the 25th second. He attached a scanned PDF pulled from the state's military draft archive. The name on it, Matthew Taylor, military service deferred in 2004. Reason, family emergency. Under the Guardian verification section, a handwritten name had been crossed out. Below it, scrawled in uneven handwriting, provisional record, pending further verification. Zaire captioned it with one haunting sentence. When someone who's never fought paints over the head of a man who once pulled soldiers from death, that's not just an insult. That's stolen valor. The internet erupted. Within 3 hours, the hashtag unworthy of the badge shot to #1 in Georgia and entered the top 10 nationwide. On platforms like X, FaceSnap, and Truthbound, users began sharing a side-by-side meme. Matthew Taylor laughing while spraying red paint, and Walter Freeman, in black and white, bandaging a wound under fire. The most viral caption read, "He bandaged for his country. The other bandaged his ego." That evening, at 7 p.m., local news channel WEX9 aired a special report. The anchor, himself a former Marine, didn't start with a question. He started with a fact. Tonight, we confirm that Matthew Taylor, the officer who attacked Mr. Walter Freeman with a can of red spray paint, has never served in any branch of the U.S. Armed Forces. In fact, military records show he falsified documents using his deceased father's identity to avoid the draft. The revelation spread across military forums like wildfire. Many veterans changed their profile pictures to an image of Walter's broken cane, etched in red. Ellis 1971, we did not forget. At the Wexley Police Department, the tension was suffocating. Chief Ronald Beckett, after nearly a week of silence, finally convened an emergency session of the Disciplinary Council. It was a short meeting because no one had anything left to defend. Each infraction was read aloud like a nail driven into Taylor's crumbling armor. Excessive use of force beyond authority. Public humiliation of an elderly citizen. Fraudulent documentation regarding military service. Severe damage to the department's honor and credibility. When it was Matthew's turn to speak, he kept repeating the same thing. I did nothing wrong. I was maintaining order. But no one was listening anymore. Then came a chilling silence. A senior member of the Disciplinary Council, a veteran who once served at Camp Liberty, looked Taylor straight in the eye and said, "You didn't just fail the uniform. You failed the name you wear." The very next day, the official ruling was released. Matthew Taylor, permanently stripped of his badge, added to the Special Oversight Registry, barred from ever serving in public duty again. No sirens, no media, just a small wooden box left on a desk. Inside, the removed badge, a sealed firearm, and a letter of denial from the Department of Veterans Affairs. Your file does not meet eligibility for review. At the bottom, one simple line. Honor cannot be borrowed, and it certainly can't be forged. 18 days after the 25th second incident, A closed-door session was held at the Wexley Federal Courthouse, a place known more for tax disputes and technical appeals than for moments of reckoning. That day, no sentences were handed down. No black robes were worn. At the center of the room stood an empty podium. On it, an old walking cane, now restored. The cracks sealed in clear epoxy, left visible like a scar preserving glass. No flag, no anthem, only silence. Walter Freeman was wheeled in. No grand tribute, no medals, no speeches. But when the 76-year-old saw his cane, the one broken beneath the boot of a uniformed man, now placed at the center like a living symbol, he simply nodded. He didn't say a word. The entire room stood. Thomas Freeman, standing beside his father, didn't make a speech either. He simply placed a thick brown envelope on the table. Inside, Walter's full record of service, unofficial combat medical logs from Iraq, policy drafts for veteran reintegration from 1997, documents long erased from public archives. Across the envelope was a single sentence. Not an honor, a restoration. That's when change began. At the Wexley Police Academy, a new core ethics module was added. The Freeman Incident. The first slide posed one question. Would you have the courage to remain still when silence is the only voice you have left? In neighboring police departments, posters of Walter's broken cane were pinned beside conduct codes. Below it, a quiet inscription. Honor makes no sound. Online, young people didn't post hashtags. They changed their profile pictures to the broken cane. No captions, no slogans, just a symbol. And that was what the system couldn't delete, couldn't explain away as technical error, couldn't dismiss as isolated misconduct. Because Walter Freeman never raised his voice to be heard. He just stood still and let silence say everything. He was never declared hero, but the entire city behaved differently because one old man refused to say a word, and in doing so, became a mirror for everyone who had forgotten the most important truth about the badge. Honor isn't stitched into a patch. It's in how you face someone who has nothing left but silence. There were no marble statues, no parades, no primetime tribute, only a wooden chair placed outside McAllister's barbershop, where it all began, and above it, etched into brick. He didn't need a shout to be heard. Walter Freeman didn't become a symbol because he did something extraordinary. He became one because he didn't need to do anything at all, and the system saw itself clearly through his stillness. He lived as he stood that day. No resistance, no complaint, just a gaze deep enough to stop a nation. 1 year after the 25th second, military academies began teaching a new ethics scenario called the Walter Protocol. At the Pinehurst Federal Police Training Center, new cadets now take a class titled, "If Silence Could Cost You Your Badge, Maybe You Never Deserved It." At high schools across Redstone County, students performed dramatizations based on Walter's story. But no one was allowed to speak his lines, because he never spoke. And that became the loudest line of all. Thomas Freeman, Walter's son, declined every interview. He never wrote a memoir, never released a book. He quietly founded the Freeman Silence Initiative, a nonprofit dedicated to investigating silent abuse of power and preserving the forgotten memories of veterans. When asked if he had anything to say to the nation, Thomas simply shook his head. "We don't need to be heard. We need to be seen, just like the way my father stood still." And then something remarkable happened. Protests against abuse no longer began with chants. They began with 25 seconds of silence, as remembrance and as indictment. No leaders organized it. No banners called for it. It was just a people united by the kind of moral clarity that doesn't need a shout. Walter Freeman, the man who once had red paint sprayed on his head, the man whose own cane was used to strike him down, left behind a lesson that will never fade. Silence is not weakness. Silence is the heaviest sentence ever handed down to corrupt power. There was no national anthem playing, only the soft wind whispering past an old wooden chair, the same chair where an elderly man once sat, and an entire system was forced to kneel before a man who never even stood.